Welcome everyone to this video, courtesy of a returning sponsor, REC Watches. Now most of you have probably seen this photo at some point in your lives. It's one of the most famous aviation photos of an SR-71 Blackbird. But it's not just any SR-71 Blackbird, this is SR-71B version, code number 61-7956. And as you can see, there's a second cockpit there because this is a trainer. In fact, it's the only purpose-built trainer to see any kind of extensive service, because they only built two, and one of them crashed pretty soon after it was constructed. They then cobbled together some hybrid and made an SR-71C, so they still had two trainers, but this left 617956 as the only purpose-built SR-71 trainer for the majority of the SR-71 program. She's now on display in Kalamazoo, which is probably one of my favourite US names. But you can also own a piece of her that's also a handy timepiece in the new Habu series. Why Habu? Well, that's the nickname on Okinawa for a local pit viper, and that became the local nickname for the SR-71s as well. While the watch's general form was inspired by the SR-71, in particular the lower dial actually contains titanium taken from the inner engine nacelle exhaust ejectors of this particular SR-71. So you could be walking around with a bit of Mach 3 spy plane on your wrist. The Habu series will be available in July, but is available for pre-order now with a discount applied for pre-orders. And if you use the link in the video description below and then use the code DRAT, you'll get an extra discount on top of the pre-order discount, which is quite a nice little feature. So thanks very much once again to REC Watches for returning to sponsor the channel and historical content, and of course preserving elements of other bits of historical vehicles. And now, on to the main video. Hello everyone! Well, I thought I'd throw in a little bit of fun for you today. We're going to look at two Pearl Harbor attack sequences. One from the 2001 Michael Bay movie Pearl Harbor, and the other from the 2019 movie Midway. Now, both attack sequences do get a fair bit of stick from anyone who's, well, bothered to look at a map of Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack, and you've probably heard me in various dry docks going on quite a bit about the Midway one, so I thought, well, let's take a look at some side-by-sides of the key moments in the Pearl Harbor attack sequence from both movies, and see who got what bits more or less right or wrong. And believe it or not, there are a few bits that are pretty good in some of the sequences, but we'll see which is which. So we're going to start by looking at how we are introduced to Pearl Harbor at the beginning of the attack sequence in each of the films. And I'm going to refer to them 2001 and 2019 movies. So in the 2001 movie, this is our establishing shot of Pearl Harbor. And there is some good and some bad to say about it. On the good side, you do have representations of ships on both sides of Ford Island. You do have little clusters of ships all over the place. This is, from a very broad perspective, a reasonable idea of what the overall layout of Pearl Harbor looked like on December 7th, 1941. But there are a fair number of errors in detail. On the west side of Ford Island, for example, the only battleship that's there is the Utah, which should be the third away from us, the one that's kind of streaming smoke or oil, but it's fairly clear they've used a capital ship model, when in fact the two closer to us should be the Detroit and the Raleigh. That's on the right-hand side of Ford Island from this shot. But over on the other side of Ford Island, we have something very strange going on, because in between the fuel tank farm, you can see there at kind of the 10 o'clock position on the far left, and Ford Island, we have a reasonably decent representation of Battleship Row. You've got 4 capital ships on the inside track, and then 3 large ships on the outside track, 2 battleships and potentially a small ship, which would be the Vestal. However, that's also in entirely the wrong position for Battleship Row. You've then got a battleship that's moored at a kind of diagonal to them, and that's actually a not terrible representation of where California is. Then you have Neosho coming back out at an angle, which is a tanker, obviously. And then you have these 3 ships, the last of which is trailing a significant number of oil down towards the bottom of the picture. That is where Battleship Row should be. So, what exactly are these ships, and why are they in the position of Battleship Row? Again, they're clearly capital ships, but they're just randomly there. And this is our opening into the sequence from the 2019 movie. Now, this is supposed to be the port aft quarter of USS Arizona, and more on that in a second, but first things first, technically, this is sort of correct in that there is only one capital ship behind the Arizona, which you can see looming off in the distance there. However, this is supposed to be the USS Nevada, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that rather prominent triple turret sitting on top of the ship model there. And therefore, that is not Nevada. As we will see as time goes on, it seems that the makers of this movie paid for a USS Arizona model and just copy-pasted it across the board. And then we switch back round, and this is where I'll give credit where credit is due. The Arizona model isn't a bad model of Arizona. Now, there is obviously the whole argument over what colour Arizona was, but as far as the general features of the model that they're using, they've got the broad strokes of the ship's model about right, particularly with things like where this casement battery is just above on the raised main deck. If you compare and contrast to this photo of Arizona after her refit, you can see it's in exactly the same place, as is the general location of the mast and so forth. But when it comes to the USS Vestal model, just out to the left here, I think I'd ask for my money back, because the real USS Vestal has substantially larger masts, substantially thicker masts, because she's got to support a lot more cranes. You can see a few crane or derrick arms there, admittedly. Also, this weird construction just forward of the superstructure, and also the superstructure itself is wrong. It should be a much wider spread, wider bridge, and the step up to the superstructure should be rounded, not this sharp 90-degree angle. Contrast to the actual USS Vestal, as you can see here. So, yeah, I mean, even the funnel height's a bit wrong in the digital model. So, they've tried, but I wouldn't say they've tried very hard to recreate Vestal properly. I think more they've used a generic cargo ship model, which just adds to the confusion for me when it comes to the 2019 movie, because there are elements of it which show that someone somewhere in the production department, and presumably the historical consultants as well, deeply cared about what they were doing. And then there are most of the other moments which show almost like there was an entire separate team working on big chunks of the visual representation that they didn't care at all. And so switching back to the 2001 movie, we now see Battleship Row, or at least something resembling Battleship Row. This is really confusing, because this doesn't match either the overhead establishing shot we saw a minute ago, nor does it match anything resembling the actual layout of Pearl Harbor at the time. Now, to give credit where credit is due, as you can see from the masts and the director rangefinder positions up top, they actually have different CGI models for the different ships, which is a step above the 2019 movie. And, for example, you can see the ship that's next in row, just to the left of this tower on shore, has twin gun turrets, which makes it a Colorado class, because 2 guns and the lower turret and the super firing. So it's definitely a Colorado. But then we see that we're clearly looking forward. We're looking at the sterns of ships here. And we've got the bow of another ship just here to our left, which from its rake could be a destroyer, could be a cruiser, whatever. Potentially could even be the USS Baltimore. That would be a cruiser that's in the kind of position that gives us this shot. But if we're looking at the bow of the Baltimore here on the left, then the ship we should be looking at dead center should be the Nevada, which A, should have a twin turret atop, not a triple, and B, shouldn't have a battleship outboard of it. Whereas if this is the Arizona, well, at least the gun turrets match up at that point. But again, the Arizona shouldn't have a battleship outboard of it either. That should be Vestal. And as you can see, there's clearly some old school cage masts popping up there. More to the point, if we look along the Battleship Row ostensibly and Ford Island, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 battleships. Now, the only possible way that is happening is if you have Nevada closest, then Arizona, then Tennessee, and then Maryland. But if Nevada is closest, then the next ship with the twin turrets, being a Colorado, well, that's supposed to be Arizona, so that's wrong. And then you've got 2 more ships further on. So, yeah, and we don't even see this layout, as I said, in the overhead shot. So it's all very, very confusing. And just in case you're wondering, if you don't have a map of Pearl Harbor to hand, what we should have on the inside row is the Nevada, so twins over triples, then the Arizona, both sets triples, the Tennessee, both sets triples, and then the Maryland should be the one right at the end. That's Colorado with twins. And then outboard, you should have Vestal opposite Arizona, West Virginia, which is a Colorado with twin turrets, outboard of Tennessee, and Oklahoma, which is another Nevada class, so triples with twin super firing, outboard of the Maryland. And then we move into the start of the attack itself in the 2019 movie, and oh boy, there's so many things to list here. Firstly, well, let's go from left to right. What's going on the left? Yeah, there's a ship that's already begun to explode. What is it, and why is it there? Because if you, again, consult a map of Pearl Harbor, look at where these ships are all positioned, we're looking from the Arizona across the stern of Vestal. So what we should be looking at is the dry docks of the Navy Yard. So either, depending on exactly which line of sight we're using, we should be looking at the Jarvis, Mugford, and Sacramento with the Argonne to their starboard side. Those possibly could be those 3 ships just immediately to the left of what should be the West Virginia, but as you can see is clearly an Arizona clone, which would then make the ships further over to the left, the Ramapo, the New Orleans, the San Francisco, and so on. Except that while that little supply ship just to the right of one of Vestal's derrick cranes could be the Ramapo, which would then make the next ship the New Orleans, why is the New Orleans in the middle of the approach in and out of the submarine base? Why is it not in the dry dock itself? That doesn't make all that much sense. Then, as we move on, obviously the entire Battleship Row has been replaced by clones of Arizona for no apparent reason. Then above them, apparently half the Japanese airstrike has gotten completely and utterly lost. Where exactly are they going? By their course, somewhere over the Waipio Peninsula and then possibly to the western part of Middle Lock. There's certainly not any kind of offensive strike against the Pacific Fleet. And, and then it turns out that Battleship Row, did you know, was attacked longitudinally by all these aircraft coming in at just above and below mast height. Because, yeah, that's clearly what happened. Spoiler alert, that is not what actually happened. They all came in across towards the ships perpendicularly, like any sane and sensible person would have done. And then over to the right, we have the first instance of a Mighty Morphin battleship. There's something which will recur throughout the 2019 Midway movie, but in this particular case, we have the bizarre sight of this slightly off-angle battleship, which apparently is also in the process of being hit by something fairly major. Now, the weird thing is, in terms of alignment relative to Battleship Row, this should be the California. However, in terms of location, this ship is occupying the slot of Neosho. And, we'll come back to that later. And, yeah, these things, we're back in the 2001 movie. Apparently there's a bunch of time-traveling modern guided missile destroyers in Pearl Harbor in 1941. Don't worry, they get blown up later. But, this is one of the more famous little goofs of the 2001 movie. To be fair, Michael Bay did persuade the US Navy to let him actually film at Pearl Harbor, so I suppose credit where credit's due on that. And again, to be fair, these things show up in relatively brief sequences, so for the majority of the audience, they probably don't have quite the chance to register that these are very, very modern ships, but still, it is quite funny. But after some, what I'm presuming are suitably evocative scenes of Japanese aircraft flying over some kid's Little League baseball game, we actually get the attack commencing in the 2001 movie, and, oh look! Torpedo bombers coming in from perpendicular, the way that they should be. So, yeah, the Michael Bay movie pulling ahead by a fairly clear margin at this point. And then you do get some shots of the various torpedo bombers and so forth flying over modern ships. Again, this is because Michael Bay managed to get permission for the simulated Japanese aircraft to fly over actual Pearl Harbor. So, be that as it may, back in the historical section, we have this sequence. So this is the outboard side of Battleship Row. You can see someone is painting and about to have a really bad day courtesy of a Japanese airdrop torpedo. But interestingly enough, we can make a deduction as to exactly which ship this is based purely on what we can see, assuming it lines up with historical reality. So we've got a battleship behind this. We're on the outboard side of Battleship Row. So consulting a map of Battleship Row, if this is the last outboard battleship we can see a little bit off in the distance, that should be the West Virginia Colorado class with twin 16-inch gun turrets. And indeed, this model has twin 16-inch gun turrets. And then you can see another ship just behind, which should be a little bit of Vestal poking out. Now, in theory, you should also see Arizona and Nevada's masts, but perhaps the angle is a little bit too sharp for that. So, yeah, that actually broadly matches up with what you would see on Battleship Row, which makes the ship that we're got the viewpoint of right here the Oklahoma. And then the modern ships get blown up. Oh dear, sorry, but it's still very funny. And then back in the 2019 movie, courtesy apparently of the world's most powerful 20mm cannon, some Japanese aircraft have managed to blow a chunk out of the bow of the Tennessee? I mean, at least that model has armament that matches, even if nothing else does. Oh, and you might also notice the California-Neosho-whatever the heck it's supposed to be is on fire repeatedly from hits that have come from the starboard side, because, as you can see, the port side, the bit that's facing outwards, is completely undamaged. And then things continue to explode, and yeah, your eyes don't deceive you, those are torpedo tracks running parallel to Battleship Row. And yes, that splash just off of Vestal there, that is a torpedo that apparently some Japanese torpedo bomber decided they were going to drop all of 10 feet away from the last possible target on that side of Battleship Row. And no, that track that's behind it leading further up Battleship Row, that's not from that. The track that you can see that's running between Arizona and Vestal is from the airdrop. That other track is from a torpedo that's been dropped slightly further up. And then, in continued application of the world's most powerful 20mm cannon, I mean, honestly, how did Japan lose when they had this level of firepower on their aircraft? Yeah, you see what's happening to Vestal? That's done apparently by a strafing run from a 0. And you can see, well, here's another Japanese aircraft walking some strafing fire with, again, optimistically, we're going to say 20mm cannon. Who knows? It could even be some machine guns. Up the back aft quarter of Arizona. Now, pay careful attention, because what's ahead of the strafing run, i.e. what's about to be hit by these shells, is just some chairs and some unfortunate crewmen, some decking, and then it's off to the Nevada just behind. Yeah, it turns out one of Arizona's crew was made entirely of C4. Who knew? I've literally done this through keyframe by keyframe. One of Arizona's crew gets hit by cannon fire and explodes. For no reason at all. Meanwhile, back in the 2001 movie, poor old Arizona's in the bomb sites of one of the level-bombing Japanese Kate dive bombers, and guess what? Not only is this dive bomber not coming in at mast top height, and coming in from vaguely the right direction, he's also, using his bomb sight and everything. So this is a much more accurate representation of how the base was being attacked than, well, everything we've seen so far from the 2019 movie. And he releases his bomb. Well, that's pretty good, actually, as a replica for the bombs that the high-altitude Japanese bombers were dropping on the US battleships. Long, very teardrop-shaped, overly sized, almost comical-looking fins. That's actually exactly what those converted 16-inch shells turned into bombs looked like. So, yeah, pretty good representation there. And now, here comes the bomb on its final approach. And oh look, there are torpedoes coming in. You can see poor old West Virginia there has already been hit by one torpedo. She's got another one coming in. And also, you can see you've got Nevada down there on the bottom right, Arizona pretty much dead center because that's where the bomb's going, Vestal there. And you'll notice that the ships actually are visually distinct. Like, they've used different models to represent ships of different classes because someone actually cared about at least a degree of historical accuracy. Meanwhile, we bring ourselves back to the 2019 movie, where we discover that, oh boy, well, off to our left here is supposed to be California by her relative position to Battleship Row, except that while California should be at a diagonal, she's at completely the wrong diagonal. She should basically be bow on towards us. Which, of course, means that that ship we saw earlier that was mysteriously hit on the starboard side was in fact Neosho, and as you can see here, yes, in fact, Neosho is remaining a Pennsylvania-class battleship, for reasons best known only to the makers of this movie. And as you can see, on the other side of Battleship Row, heading further into the bay, there apparently is nothing. And before anyone suggests, could that be Nevada? No, Nevada is still in Battleship Row. You see that a few frames later on. Now, I don't know who this is supposed to be. We actually, in this sequence, get as close as to a decent scene as you're going to get in the 2019 movie of some of the ships in the Navy Yard a bit before they fall victim to more magical 20mm rounds, presumably the Jarvis, the Mugford, and the Sacramento, and but then that should be the Argonne, but it's not. It's in the wrong position, and also its cruiser just off to the left. But what this is, in theory, this should be the California, but she's completely switched angle from where she was in literally a scene that was no more than 2 or 3 seconds earlier. And she's also switched colour and moved considerably further away from Ford Island. So either California has developed magical teleportation powers, or this is an attempt to show USS Nevada's breakout. But if it's supposed to represent Nevada, well, she's still behind the Arizona, as we established a couple of seconds after and a couple of seconds before this scene, which, well, in theory, that's supposed to be Oklahoma going up there with the fireball silhouetting an incoming Japanese attack aircraft, with, in theory, West Virginia off here to our left, theoretical Tennessee mildly on fire to our right, and, well, what's left of Vestal after that ridiculous 20mm strafing run off here in our immediate left. Then some more mysteriously powerful strafing runs, and I don't know where all this flak is coming from. Apparently there's a battle star hidden somewhere in the Navy Yard for all the effectiveness it's got. But here on the bottom right we can see Arizona mightily resisting the almost wave-top level attacking parallel running Japanese aircraft with a 20mm Orlikon. No. I mean, look, this set is entirely CGI. So what stops you CGIing up a Browning 50 cal or a 1.1 inch? The ones that would have been on Arizona. And I mean, if you wanted to do it in real life, there's a quad 1.1 inch on the North Carolina. I'm sure they would have let you film a couple of sequences on it. I mean, heck, at this stage, you might as well have just filmed somebody firing the 1.1 inch quad mount on North Carolina and just left that in, actually North Carolina fighting at Pearl Harbor, and the simple presence of the quad 1.1 inch would have made that scene more historically accurate than the one we're looking at right at this moment. And, well, we continue on with this. So we're coming towards the end of the analysis, fortunately, because we're just looking at the sequence in both movies from the opening of the attack to the destruction of the Arizona, because for the 2019 movie, that, thank goodness, is pretty much the extent of it. Obviously, in the 2001 movie, it's all about the Pearl Harbor attack, so it does go on for a bit more. But nonetheless, in the 2019 movie, here are the Japanese level bombers. Yeah, as opposed to in the 2001 movie, where they're bombing from something approaching the correct height. Here, as you can see, these Japanese pilots have invented the brand new capability of flying in altitudes that can actually be measured in possibly the lowest part of 4 figures. And this particular individual in the top center has just dropped the bomb, quote-unquote, and you'll see what I mean in a second, which is about to destroy the Arizona. And, yeah, here we go. What the heck is this? For the longest time, when I first saw this movie, I thought they'd really gone completely whole hog and dropped a torpedo onto the Arizona, which would be, pretty much par for the course for this whole entire sequence. But as you can see, it's not a torpedo, mostly because it doesn't have another set of fins and it doesn't have a propeller. But, yeah, this is not a bomb either. I mean, it's absolutely not the converted 16-inch shell that was historically dropped. We actually saw the relatively decent representation the 2001 movie did of it. I don't know exactly what this is. The best I can conclude is that perhaps this is a fuel tank, a long-distance droppable fuel tank that came with the model, and someone who didn't know any better decided they were just going to drop a random fuel tank on the Arizona. But anyway, it does get worse, because here's where it lands. What? This is the port side. You can just about see in the top right of the picture, the back port side of the Arizona's superfiring forward turret. So this is the port side of the ship. You can see there a 5-inch gun pointing out to port and kind of top center of the picture. And, well, you've got this step out on this platform that we've got, which is, as you can see from the line of guard railing from the deck slightly lower down, this is the outermost portion of this step. So this is pretty much as dead center amidships, but on the port side, as you can get. This is going to be just aft of the bridge, roughly adjacent to the funnel. So given that this bomb has been dropped from ahead of the ship and has come in at a slight angle heading further aft, it's heading for either a pump room or 5-inch ammunition storage, or the boiler rooms, depending on exactly how far down it goes and how it deflects off various decks. And this somehow conspires to teleport itself several dozen feet forward to cause an explosion in the... Hang on a minute, let me check the notes, what's on the plans. The soda fountain and ice cream freezer. Wow, I don't know what you Americans are putting in your soft drinks. I'd really like to know. And this somehow triggers a secondary explosion in the... Again, let me check the plans. Crew quarters and hammock berthing area. Or if we're being particularly generous, which I don't particularly see any real reason to be, but let's go for it, and go a further deck down to where you can see the lowest part of the explosion beginning to blow out one level below the casemates. This is clearly a result of the highly combustible material found in the barber shop and ship fitters shop. Oh, and the dentists. I mean, yeah, technically there is a 14-inch powder room considerably further below roughly the forwardmost point of this explosion, but this explosion, as you can see, is clearly not originating from particularly deep inside the ship. And then, fortunately, our last screen cap from this sequence, because I'm not even going to go into the fact that they have Arizona actually sink in 3 different ways and teleport twice in the aftermath, which is just even more insulting to the memory of those who died on the Arizona, but... Well, this scene kind of sums it all up. So you can see there you've got the shockwave of Arizona being destroyed, hiding mostly behind a colossal fire aboard the Vestal. You've got the Not Nevada further back, vaguely on fire. West Virginia, they're just ahead of the Arizona and Vestal, looking relatively intact. And then what the heck is happening further forwards? You should have the Oklahoma capsizing with another battleship behind it, obviously, and I can't quite work out what this is on the left. It's clearly 2 battleships. They're clearly one after the other, whereas one should be tucked in behind the other, and you can clearly see 2 sets of masts, so this is supposed to be 2 ships, but if you actually zoom right in, somehow this model has merged because the forward ship, the left-handmost ship, lacks a stern, and the starboard ship that sort of finishes with this big oil fire just behind its stern has no bow, and it's somehow merged into some gargantuan double Frankenship. And then a Vestal clone has mysteriously appeared floating and on fire in the middle of the seaway for no bizarre reason whatsoever. And you'll be pleased to know Mighty Morphin Power Neo show over there has, again, transformed itself. As we saw previously, it was a Pennsylvania-class battleship. It's now turned back into some kind of cargo vessel, I think another Vestal clone. And mysteriously is also no longer on fire and is in, actually, surprisingly enough, the right position. Now, compare and contrast that to the 2001 movie, where our far more accurate bomb, both literally and figuratively and digitally, as you can see, is coming in for a hit near enough as makes no difference where the US Navy's damage report reckons the hit came. I think this is actually aiming maybe just a fraction further forward than the US Navy finally reckoned it landed. But at least it's coming in on the correct side, the starboard side. And also, I don't want to have to go back to the 2019 movie screen caps, but people somehow survived being less than 20 feet away from the explosion the 2019 movie showed out on an open deck. Yeah, that is clearly not happening. Now, that's not to say that this sequence, it doesn't have its faults. I mean, amongst other things, in the magazine that it lands in, there are both shells and propellant charges in the same magazine, which isn't how anyone does it, but it's still massively, massively closer to being accurate than the previous one. Also, you might have noticed in the previous one, all the ships are grey, whereas here, Arizona is something closer to the colours she was actually in. Obviously, there's the whole debate about whether the turret roofs would be red or not, but this is a 2001 movie, so I think we can forgive them that much. And then, of course, it's time for Arizona to be destroyed. And, well, again, credit where credit is due. For all the other faults of this movie, this is pretty much about as close as you're going to get to in a modern recreation, certainly of its time period, to the way Arizona actually blew up, as really you're going to see in anything. You can see the explosion starts off deep in the ship, roughly where the magazines are. The ship rears up out of the water, buckles in two, pretty much exactly as we see in the actual historical footage. And, well, that's the end of poor old Arizona. And in one of the wrapping up sequences of the attack itself, we see this, which, again, will be fairly famous from many black and white photos. What's left of Arizona's foremast keeling over forwards over the broken remains of her bow. So, there is, of course, a huge amount more we could go into in the attack sequences of both those movies, let alone going into the, Coral Sea Doolittle Raid Midway elements of the Midway movie, and for that matter, the Doolittle sequence of the Pearl Harbor movie, the 2001 movie. But these highlights, I suppose, if you could call it that, where we're looking at similar elements within the two movies, hopefully give you some idea of which one is somewhat more historically accurate. Of course, I'm not going to say either one is completely historically accurate, because there are, as we mentioned here, mistakes in the 2001 movie, but there are a lot more in the 2019 movie in this section. And as I said, I'm not entirely sure why or how these got in, because other details that they have in other elements of the movie, the latter one, are very, very spot on. So, as I said, all I can conclude is perhaps the movie was made by two separate teams, and one team was actually listening, the other team was basically playing Call of Duty with fancy CGI graphics. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and hope to see you again in another video sometime soon.